I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, our God and our Creator. Please be seated. All done. It's all done. By the end of tonight's Maundy Thursday service, everything we have known about Jesus will be stripped away. For a year of Sundays, we have worshiped Jesus using shiny, precious props and colorful vestments. Now that is done. Because tonight, at the end of the service, we will strip the fair linen from the altar. We will strip the hangings from the lectern and from the pulpit. We will carry the consecrated bread to the side chapel. In the last days of Holy Week, Jesus himself is stripped of his identity. In this evening's readings from Matthew, Jesus is abandoned by his apostles. We'll see that a little bit later on. They lose their courage. They lose the courage we hope would spring from their faith. As we will see at the approach of Judas and the soldiers, the apostles run into the night. In another reading, a young man among them dashes away naked, leaving behind the linen, leaving behind his covering so that he is entirely naked. The disciples also are stripped of their identity. And I think it is true for us. When any of us experiences a major life change, we become suddenly naked and undefined. Like the young man, we are stripped naked. When we lose a job, a lover, or a parent to death, we no longer know who we are, and that can make us very afraid. And our secular culture presses us to plan. It presses us to stay in control. What we see is in the stripping of the altar that the things we knew, the things we counted on, they can all be taken away from us. And we will learn tonight and in the suffering of Good Friday that we are not in control. This is disorienting, but it offers us an opportunity to focus on what is fundamentally important. God invites us in our emptiness, when we are stripped naked, to turn not to control, but to turn to faith. Tomorrow on Good Friday, Jesus will be literally stripped naked, his clothing torn from him at the foot of the cross. This violation is intended to humiliate Jesus. In taking his clothes, the Roman soldiers grind him down into meaninglessness. To them, and as they hope he will be seen, to us, they hope he is only another victim, naked, plucked of dignity, respect, humanity, left to rot on a cross. And if we are paying attention, we who love and worship Jesus are tonight also stripped of the support of our identities. And we must ask ourselves then, what remains in the light of Jesus' humiliation? Who are we when faced with this bare altar. From Thursday night in the garden until Friday afternoon, Jesus is humiliated, suffered, feels abandoned, and then dies. And we witness, we remember his pain and his death. By 3 o'clock tomorrow, there is nothing more. At the moment of his death, in the Gospel of John, Jesus cries, "It is finished." I have a phrase I use with my dog, Theo, when I need him to move on after playing with me. He is 2 years old. He is almost violently exuberant. And I put my hands out to him and I say, "All done." And I used to do something similar with my children when they were toddlers, and they'd finish their supper. And I'd say, "All done, no more." And that phrase is repeated to us all our lives, throughout our lives. A job ends, all done. A relationship fails, all done. Someone dies, all done. What is left in that moment when it's all done? The job, the lover, the parent, each is gone. What do we have left? Who are we? We awake into a new kind of emptiness. A key component of how we know ourselves no longer exists. The job is no longer who we are. We get up in the morning and we have no workplace to go. The relationship ends, and who we were with that person, in that person, is gone. It vanishes. We are empty. When my father died almost 30 years ago, I experienced an enormous stripping of identity. He'd actually had cancer for quite a few years, but our family lived in a zone of magical thinking. My father was an imposing and a dominant psychological force in our lives, and as his eldest child, I saw the world through his eyes. And I believed with a magical certainty that he would be with us as long as I could imagine. And then, one evening, my mother called. The children were yelling and playing around me, but I stayed with my mother on the phone until the EMTs arrived. And even as the seconds ticked by and Dad was not breathing, I believed somehow he was not really dead. And it took me a full year to step into the emptiness of my father's absence. A person dies, a parent, a spouse, a child, a friend. We can only exist honestly in the present. And those we loved, our identity in our jobs or in our relationships, fall into eclipse. The awful nowness of the present robs us of our identity. If we knew ourselves to exist through someone else's love for us, who are we now without them? Tonight on Maundy Thursday, we step into the emptiness of a world that is no longer ordered and familiar. The shepherd is struck down, and we, the sheep, are scattered in our minds and in our souls. However, Jesus invites us into a new identity in him. Jesus invites us into faith. The word Maundy and Maundy Thursday comes from the Latin new commandment. At the Last Supper, according to John's Gospel, Jesus gives the soon-to-be forsaken disciples a new commandment. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, Jesus says. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. In the whirlpool of loss, we center ourselves in these two truths. This is the new trust, that we love one another. This is the new faith, that we know Christ loves us. Later in tonight's service, we will wash each other's feet. This is the new commandment in action. We strip our feet naked and offer them in trust to our neighbor. In humility, our neighbor holds our feet, our nakedness, in love. Then we will strip the altar and the space around it of its familiar appointments, its brass and silver and hangings. And what do we do when even the fair linen has been taken away? The fair linen is the last cloth covering the altar, under the candlesticks and the chalices, under the colorful hangings. When it is gone, the altar stands just by itself. This is our faith. This is still an altar. This still provides a symbolic focus for the bedrock of our faith. For the altar remains and grounds our worship, just as our faith grounds our lives, even when we face two raised palms and the news that it is all done. Amen.